Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. In this video we're going to be talking about ASUS's ROG Ally. This started off as an April Fool's prank and eventually became reality yesterday for you guys when Linus from Linus Tech Tips as well as Dave 2D showed it off physically on their channels, and they gave their comments, and also ASUS made some claims, and I'm going to comment on both of those. And I just want to kind of set expectations because some of the stuff that they said, like 2x performance at 35 watt, you have to understand that that's not going to be meaningful in a real capacity outside of CPU. Now, let's back up. First off, this is unscripted, so this might be a little ranty here and there, so just bear with me because I just want to kind of address a few things. Number one, I'm very happy that ASUS is entering in this market. However, I was happy when Alienware tried entering this market with the UFO, and that never materialized. The reason it never materialized is because when they did their market research data, gamers are very opinionated, because when they look at the value of gaming products, they're comparing it to Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. But Nintendo, they make money on their hardware. And also Valve now, right? Valve, Microsoft, Sony, they all sell their hardware at a loss or at cost because they make up their money revenue from game sales. They are not making any money from hardware outside of Nintendo. ASUS and Best Buy do not have this advantage, which means that once they make the sale with you, their transaction is done. They're not making any more money, which means that whatever money that they're going to make, it needs to be worthwhile. So for me, when I see that ASUS is like, go to Best Buy's website and fill out this data saying, fill out this notification saying you're interested in the Ally, this looks like a big survey to me that both Best Buy and ASUS are conducting to wonder how many people are actually interested in this device. They know that not everyone that signs up is going to be a buyer, but this is still data for them to determine what the price of this product should be. I am vaguely aware of what chip should be used in this device, and that could be complete BS. However, when I take a look at that chip, and I'm aware of the BOM costs from other providers on this chip, it's very inexpensive. And ASUS, with their volume of sales, they can get it even cheaper than these other companies, which means that this product could effectively be very cheap if they have enough volume. Now, that all determines if this is actually going to happen. Worst case, I could see them charging like $800 for this device as a high-end to have at least decent margins on this device and not sell a bunch. The problem becomes if they only anticipate selling like 50,000 units, 100,000 units, ASUS might not even entertain the idea at all, because it's not going to be worth it for them. The amount of money and the margins that they're going to have to do, they're going to have to start increasing the costs even more to make up for even entertaining this idea at all. So this is the real problem, where it might not actually materialize into anything. I hope that it actually comes out, but there are still hurdles yet to come if this is actually going to hit, market at all. Okay, so I'm happy that this is coming out. I do have some caveats to, well, if this is even going to exist or not. I still hope that it does, and I'm a big fan of it because more competition is better for us. Good. I'm glad I got that out of the way, because now we have to talk about their performance claims, which are bogus. So first up, they're saying 2x performance at 35 watt. Now, if we take a look at this, if we just examine the RDNA 2 to RDNA 3 data from the APUs from 6800U to 7840U, what we've seen even at like basically 28 watt, and even going over 28 watt, the improvements are like nothing. You can push more power into the GPU all you want, but you're not going to actually get any more. There's other constraints that are not going to give anything, which means that if we're only looking at a 30% increase on 7840U over the 6800U, and 6800U was about 30% better than the Steam Deck at 15 watt, you're not going to hit 2x at 35 watt. More than likely, this 35 watt 2x performance claim is strictly CPU single-threaded scores alone. So Zen 2 N7 versus Zen 4 N4, especially when we can push a lot of power into Zen 4 N4 and hit high frequencies at 35 watt and only going to CPU, yeah, I think that is totally 100% possible to see 2x single-threaded CPU scores between these two platforms. However, that really doesn't do all that much for us in gaming handhelds. And I've been doing this for a while now, and the thing that has always held us back is the GPU, which is why the Steam Deck was so big, because RDNA 2 was such a huge leap across the board at every power scale. That was a big leap. The problem is the difference between N7 RDNA 2 to N4 RDNA 3 is not that huge. So the end result is what they're saying is a 1.5 times increase, or a 50% increase on 15 watt over the Steam Deck. That sounds closer to reality. However, that's not going to be for every game because there are different types of compute on the GPU that do not translate to this. So you do have some swing in this in some regard. However, when we talk about these things, right, I'm just kind of addressing these things kind of generally speaking. You should see these performance scaling at lower wattage as well. I'll be able to do tests when I get stuff in, and we'll be do, exactly, 4 watt, 5 watt, 6 watt, like I normally do. And I'll show you what the increase is, and we can do a comparison and show the performance differences between them per watt. So you have like a very easy view on seeing where the performance differences on these different chips. The other part of this that I want to address is that even if we are 50% more performance over Steam Deck at 15 watt versus 15 watt, the difference is that the Steam Deck runs on an 800p display. And the reason that Valve chose an 800p display wasn't just cost alone. They chose 800p because if you look at Windows apps, right? If you look at a Windows app, it requires at least 768 pixels height for, to have OK and cancel. If you have a 720p display, that stuff gets cut off. So you need at least 768. So they went for 800p. So they went for a 16:10 panel so that if you ever needed to get a box that you needed to click OK or cancel on, you would be able to do it without having to worry about anything. That's why Valve chose 800p. Now, 1080p will obviously fit this just fine, but the problem is that RDNA 2 doesn't really run games all that great at 1080p, which is another reason why they went to 800p. They need a lower resolution because at low power and what it's doing, it can only really satisfy that resolution. So going up in resolution doesn't pay. So what we have here is ASUS just having this 1080p panel. Now, I'm not opposed to these panels because for us enthusiasts, we know that we're never going to run at these resolutions for most games. We're going to be compensating for that. My concern is that general people are going to go into Best Buy, they have a Steam Deck, they're going to get the Ally and go, oh boy, it's 50% better. And then they'll look at God of War. Now, if they look at God of War and they go settings for settings, right? FSR2, ultra performance mode, I don't know what it is, but the sub resolution that the actual render resolution of God of War on the Steam Deck is actually 424p or something like that, and being upscaled to 800p or 720p. Meanwhile, ultra performance mode FSR2 on 1080p is actually a render resolution of 720p and then upscaled to 1080p. So now what you have on the Ally is that the sub resolution that is the actual render resolution is the native render resolution in 16:9 on a Steam Deck, which the Steam Deck doesn't do for many modern games. A lot of modern games are being rendered at a lower resolution and then upscaled using FSR2 or FSR, some upscaling technique to hit that higher resolution. So this is the general problem. Now, I do want to put a caveat on this, is that ASUS, especially with what Linus Tech Tips showed, is that on their little command center thing, they have a little button that shows 1080p. If we take a look at these buttons really quick, they have a method here where you can actually click on the mouse mode or change a controller, or you can have it be auto, where it tries to auto determine if a game is running or if it's not, and then the controls will, I guess, pivot over to be mouse emulation. There's another problem here that happened on INEO devices. Certain games like Max Payne 3, Nier Automata, when they don't detect a physical mouse connected to the machine, they actually won't run. They'll say there's no mouse connected and just quit out. So then you have to install a virtual mouse driver and other stuff. So these are other problems by not having all fully complemented hardware inside of these devices that can occur on a Windows PC for these particular games. So these are things to be mindful of. There are a lot of things that ASUS is looking at in there, and it all looks really cool and sweet. But if we keep on going and talking about the panel, right, the 1080p panel, we're going to have to use sub-resolutions, let alone 120 hertz. Now, there are two benefits to having a 120 hertz panel. Number one is at 120 hertz, we don't have to worry about running the display at 40 hertz because we can instead just do 40 FPS frame cap, and that'll fit into 120 hertz. The other side is that with a 120 hertz panel, we can actually do BFI, or black frame insertion, and run games at 60 frames, but then do BFI so that the screen is going on and off, is strobing on and off. And because the panel gets so outrageously bright, one of the downsides of BFI is the display gets naturally dimmer. So if you can pump more brightness into it, that should counteract the BFI nature of it. Now, I don't know if this is going to support BFI or if we can hack it in there or not. We'll talk about hacking and other things in just a moment, but these are two things that I can see that are nice about a 120 hertz display. The bottom line here is that if you have any thoughts of like actually running at 120 hertz on modern games, it's not going to happen. Even at like outrageously low sub resolutions, you're not going to hit 120 FPS. And I'm saying that even when you're able to drill the Zen 4 CPUs to its max, because if we take a look at the tiny little batteries on this, now Linus said that it's similar to the Steam Deck. Let's just say it's a 40 watt-hour battery with these two little tiny batteries that are here. If you're gunning the machine at 35 watt, desperately trying to hit 120 hertz with a blurry, upscaled image, which is just silly to me, but let's say you want to do that. You're effectively, like, if we're at 35 watt TDP, that does not include rest of system power, which has two fans blaring away trying to cool off this SoC. So now you have two fans spinning up, using even more power than one fan, and the screen is blaring. So all of this total system power is very, very high, rest of system power, as opposed to the rest of the system power that's on the Steam Deck. So now you're looking at, what, like 55, almost 60 watt total system power. You're at 30 minutes of battery life total. You're playing a game basically at 100%. Within 20 minutes, Windows is going to bark at you that the battery's low. I mean, there's just so many things here that just don't make a bunch of sense to me, that you're just striving to hit this 120 hertz goal when you really have to push image quality very low and then upscale it. I just really need to emphasize that playing modern games and hitting 120 is not going to happen in a lot of cases. And it's not going to be even pretty. Now, maybe you are the type of person that's going to be playing while plugged in mains and stuff. Fine, you're not on battery. That's something that you can do. But the image quality is going to be so bad that I don't see the benefit here. You're better off using something like BFI, run a game at 60, and then just play the game with better image quality. And you'll have a much smoother overall. It'll be much better overall. So 120 hertz is nice in two respects, but trying to run a game at 120 hertz on a handheld isn't really worthwhile. Going into hacking, which we talked about before, if we were to look at the display, now one of the things that Dave 2D released was the mainboard image itself, and there's a little connector right there, and there's like J4502 or whatever. I looked that up, and it shows as a touch and digitizer connector. So this is likely going to be for the LCD itself. Looking this up, it sort of indicates that these panels are MIPI based, which means that if it's MIPI and it's not embedded DisplayPort, it means that VRR is likely not going to happen. Now, take this with a grain of salt. I mean, the J4502 or whatever also referenced the iPhone 7 a lot. So take this with a grain of salt. It does reference it being a connector for a display. Those displays are typically MIPI based. That doesn't mean that it can't be EDP, but right now it's looking like a MIPI-based panel. So if we keep on going here, right, what games could run at 120 hertz? Well, older games could run at 120 hertz. The other problem that ASUS didn't tell us is the panel native portrait or native landscape? If it's native portrait, just so you guys know, a lot of people might not know this, the Steam Deck is native portrait display. It's rendered this way. It's 800 by 1280. It's not 1280 by 800. What that means is that on Windows, for older APIs like DirectX 8 and lower, when you try to run these games in Windows and they try to resolve on a portrait-based panel, they pretty much crash right away. Now, I have done videos showing how you can correct this, but this is not good for a mass-market device. So hopefully, this panel is native landscape, which could avoid a lot of these problems, and games will just run with no problem. So hopefully this is the case, and ASUS already looked at this and got a native landscape panel. So fingers crossed there, because those would be some of the PC games that you could actually play at 120 hertz. And if it's a native based panel, you wouldn't be able to play them because most of them be broken and you have to fix them. So that's a whole other bag of nuts. Steam Deck gets around this because GameScope is the compositor there, and also they're already being wrapped in other APIs which already support it, and the rotation, so there's never ever a problem on Steam Deck running older games because of the compositor and the wrapping that happens. Whereas on Windows, you need to wrap these APIs by themselves. This isn't a problem, but for general people, this is not understandable. They don't know why this is happening. So it's a learning process and an education process. Here's hoping that this whole thing doesn't matter, and I'm just saying this, but this is a thing that I wish that ASUS would have said, because it would have been better. Because at this point, GPD, both their Win 4 and the Win Max 2 are both landscape-based displays. And at this point, anyone that's coming out with a portrait-based panel on a PC gaming handle that runs Windows, I'm less interested in. Okay, so that's just one thing that I want to kind of address. Also looking at the hardware, I didn't see it. I didn't see any rumble motors. Potentially there is no rumble at all on this device at all. On the Steam Deck, they're actually using Rumble with haptic emulation. So there's haptics that you use to like get a feel for on the touchpads. But these haptic engines also are emulating Rumble, and they're doing that because of the lawsuit that has happened with the people that had made a patent on Rumble motors and whatnot. So Valve made their own Rumble, and potentially ASUS is not including Rumble at all because they don't want to entertain lawsuits and stuff. So potentially there's no Rumble on this device as well. The other thing is we don't know how the controller is being interfaced at all, how it's being initialized. Is it showing up as an Xbox 360 controller? Is it showing up as an Xbox One controller? Is there any gyro controls? Do they have any gyro type of functionality that can hook up to anything so that you can do gyro stuff like you can do on all the other handhelds that exist? The GBD4, GBD Win 4, the GBD Max 2, the iNeo 2, the Steam Deck. All of these have gyro controls to some degree or manner that you can implement and get going in games. Does the ROG Ally have any gyro capability for its controls? But I don't know. Basically, a lot of my questions and concerns about the ROG Ally. This has been a long rant, and I kind of just going on and on. But there's a lot to consider when making a PC gaming handheld because there's a lot of caveats. And when you look at the availability of parts that are out there, and if you just try to shoehorn them all together, there are problems that occur. And just going for bigger and better is not always the best case for a PC gaming handheld. Generally speaking, we want to do the opposite of whatever hardcore PC gaming on desktop is doing. We want to do almost exactly the opposite. So that's my spiel. Hopefully you guys stuck with me through the whole thing. I'll try to chapterize this to make it kind of make any sense. But a lot of the decisions that ASUS made on the face of them are worse decisions for people in the public because they are good looking PC gaming specs, but they're actually really bad PC gaming handheld specs. Two fans, another NVMe that's 2230. They didn't go for 2280. A super bright display, which is great, but it also used more power. 1080p, 120 hertz. All of these things just use more power, and the APU is not going to be able to drive to either that resolution or that frame rate. So what are you even really doing? There's like these design decisions that just look good on paper, but I just feel like if anyone just took a second to test it out, they go, why did we do this? That is my core problem with it. I wouldn't have minded if it was a very enthusiast product because enthusiasts will figure out the problems. But for a general public, I don't see them solving these unless we get more information in. So that's the end of my rant on the ROG Ally. As always, guys, thank you for your time and thanks for watching.